Have you ever wondered what really happens behind the velvet ropes and flashing cameras of Hollywood? We see the red carpets, the acceptance speeches, the perfect smiles, but just beyond the spotlight, there's another world entirely. A world filled with secrets so strange, so bewildering, they defy belief. These aren't just rumors or tabloid fantasies. These are the real, documented, and utterly bizarre stories that stars themselves sometimes wish would stay hidden. Today, we're pulling back that glittering curtain to reveal the 25 strangest American celebrity stories from the past. Stories that will shock you, make you laugh, and maybe even keep you up at night. Think about the celebrities you admire, the actors, musicians, and icons who feel almost superhuman. We put them on pedestals, imagining lives of endless glamour and excitement. But the truth is often far more curious, more human, and more surprising than anything fiction could dream up. From covert government missions to secret identities, from unexplained disappearances to jaw-dropping acts of generosity or pure madness, these tales remind us that fame doesn't erase strangeness, it amplifies it. Behind every famous face is a story waiting to be told, and some of those stories are wilder than any script. So settle in and get ready for a journey into the unknown corners of celebrity history. This isn't just a countdown, it's an exploration of the moments when fame collides with the utterly inexplicable. We'll meet legends who lived double lives, icons who made choices that still baffle us decades later, and superstars who found themselves at the center of mysteries that remain unsolved. Whether you're a pop culture enthusiast or just love a good story, what you're about to hear will change how you see fame forever. Let's begin. Our first story takes us to the height of the 1960s, a time of free love and wild impulses, and into the orbit of one of Hollywood's most brilliant and bewildering figures, Marlon Brando. Fresh off his iconic performances and already cemented as a legend, Brando was a man known as much for his mercurial nature as his method acting. He possessed a unique combination of immense wealth, profound boredom with the trappings of fame, and a deep, almost childish desire to create moments of pure, unscripted drama. This peculiar blend of motives culminated one evening at a star-studded Hollywood party. Amidst the usual glamorous chatter, Brando found himself captivated by a woman he had just met. She wasn't a fellow actress or a socialite, but rather a casual acquaintance who happened to mention in passing a lifelong dream she held. She spoke wistfully of her desire to one day own her own private island, a place of complete escape and solitude. For most people, this is a common daydream, a fantasy discussed but never seriously pursued. For Marlon Brando, it was a call to action. Seized by a sudden and overwhelming impulse, Brando decided then and there to make this stranger's dream a reality. He didn't just offer to help her look at real estate listings. He immediately had his aides summon his lawyer to the party. Right there, amidst the clinking glasses and canapes, Brando began the formal process of attempting to purchase an island in the South Pacific for this woman he barely knew. The story goes that he was absolutely serious, discussing financing and legal transfers with a straight face as the party swirled around them. It was an act of breathtaking generosity, but also one of profound eccentricity. So what drives a man to try and buy an island for a virtual stranger? Some who knew him speculated it was a grand romantic gesture, an attempt to impress and win her over in the most extravagant way imaginable. Others saw it as a performance, a piece of living theater where he was both the director and the star, creating a real-life scenario more interesting than any script. But perhaps the most compelling explanation lies in Brando's own complex relationship with the world. He was deeply disillusioned with Hollywood and craved authentic human connection. This wildly impulsive act may have been his way of cutting through the superficiality of his environment to create a moment of genuine, life-changing wonder, if only to prove to himself that he still could. Ultimately, the island purchase never went through. The logistical realities and the woman's own likely shock probably intervened, bringing the fantasy back down to earth. But the story remains a perfect snapshot of Brando's essence. It reveals a man who was endlessly fascinating, utterly unpredictable, and forever dancing on the line between profound kindness and performative madness. He didn't just play complex characters, he lived a complex life, one where buying an island on a whim was just another Tuesday night. If Marlon Brando's whimsy was a fleeting spectacle, our next story represents a long-term commitment to the extraordinary. In the glittering, chaotic world of Michael Jackson, nothing was ever conventional, not his music, not his lifestyle, and certainly not his choice of best friend. For a significant part of the 1980s, the king of pop's constant companion was not another celebrity or a family member, but a chimpanzee named Bubbles. This wasn't a mere pet kept in a cage. Bubbles was a full-fledged member of Jackson's inner circle, treated with a level of privilege and intimacy that captivated and bewildered the world. Their life together was something out of a surreal fairy tale. Bubbles ate at the dinner table, slept in a crib in Michael's bedroom, and had full access to the Neverland Ranch estate. He was frequently dressed in matching outfits, tiny denim jackets and diapers that coordinated with Jackson's own iconic stage wear. The chimp accompanied his famous owner on tour across the globe, even reportedly having his own seat on the private jet. Paparazzi photos of the pair, Michael gently holding Bubbles' hand, the chimp peeking out from behind his leg, became front-page news, transforming their bond into a global talking point. Tabloids oscillated between painting it as a heartwarming tale of an isolated star-finding companionship and a bizarre sideshow that signaled something stranger at play. To understand this relationship, we have to look beyond the tabloid frenzy. For Michael Jackson, Bubbles was far more than a novelty. In many ways, the chimp represented an ideal companion. He offered unconditional love and loyalty without the judgment, betrayal, or complexity of human relationships. In a life defined by immense pressure and a deep-seated sense of isolation, Bubbles was a source of pure, simple joy. He was a living connection to the childhood Michael felt he had missed, a playful and innocent presence in a world he often found too demanding and cynical. Yet there's a poignant and darker layer to this story that speaks to the profound loneliness of mega fame. As Bubbles grew older and stronger, his behavior naturally became more unpredictable and potentially dangerous. An adult chimpanzee possesses immense physical power, and the whimsical companion of yesterday could become a genuine threat today. The heartbreaking but necessary decision was made to move Bubbles to an animal sanctuary. This separation marked the end of a highly publicized era, but it also served as a metaphor for the unsustainable nature of the world Michael had built around himself, a world where even the most devoted companionship could be fractured by the realities of his unique existence. The legacy of Michael and Bubbles is a complex one. It's a story that can be viewed as both charmingly eccentric and deeply sad, a testament to a man's yearning for simplicity in a life that was anything but. It reminds us that fame, for all its glamour, can create a loneliness so vast that a bond with an animal feels like the most authentic connection available. Michael Jackson didn't just have a pet. He sought a soulmate in the most unlikely of places, creating a chapter in pop culture history that remains as unforgettable as it was strange. While Michael Jackson's friendship with a chimp was a very public oddity, our next story reveals a far more calculated and contentious kind of performance, one that played out not on stage, but in a courtroom. In the glittering, over-the-top world of 1980s entertainment, few figures shone brighter or more flamboyantly than Liberace. The pianist and showman was a spectacle of sequins, fur coats, jewel-encrusted costumes, and candelabras, performing with a wink and a smile to adoring crowds. His entire persona was a masterclass in theatrical excess, yet he meticulously maintained a public image as a devout, family-oriented bachelor who was simply giving the people what they wanted, a show. This carefully constructed illusion was directly challenged in 1982 by the Daily Mirror, a British newspaper. In a column, writer Cassandra, whose real name was William Connor, described Liberace as a fruit-flavored, deadly, winking, sniggering, chromium-plated, scent-impregnated, luminous, quivering, giggling, fruit-flavored, mincing, ice-covered heap of mother love. The piece was a masterpiece of innuendo, using every coded homophobic slur available at the time to imply, without ever directly stating, that Liberace was homosexual. For the performer, this wasn't just an attack, it was a direct threat to the entire empire he had built. His brand relied on a strange, unspoken agreement with his largely middle American, older female fanbase. They could enjoy the spectacle from a safe distance, comforted by the idea that it was all just harmless, campy fun. Liberace's response was swift and severe. He sued the Daily Mirror for libel, launching one of the most surreal legal cases of the decade. The trial became a media circus, with Liberace himself taking the stand to perform his version of masculinity for the jury. He passionately denied the allegations, portraying himself as a deeply hurt and misunderstood entertainer. His defense was built on the absurd premise that his incredibly flamboyant stage persona was just that, a persona, completely disconnected from the humble, heterosexual man he claimed to be offstage. He even famously declared that he was against homosexuality, calling it, against the laws of God and nature, a stunning act of denial that shocks the modern conscience. The most bewildering part of this entire affair is that he won. The jury found in his favor, awarding him £22,000 in damages, a sum that was a symbolic victory more than a financial one. The verdict was a testament to his power as a performer. He had so convincingly sold his fictionalized identity that a court of law officially certified it. He celebrated the win by performing a victory concert on the courthouse steps, turning a legal proceeding into another chapter of his grand show. Yet this victory was profoundly hollow. It was a triumph of image over truth, forcing a man to loudly deny his own identity in a very public forum to protect his livelihood. He was trapped by his own success, compelled to defend a lie because the truth would have ended his career in that era. The Liberace lawsuit stands as a heartbreaking relic of a less accepting time. It highlights the immense pressure and profound hypocrisy that many LGBTQ+ individuals faced, especially those in the public eye. His story is a stark reminder that fame does not always grant freedom. Sometimes it builds a gilded cage. Liberace lived a life of spectacular visibility, yet he was forced to remain utterly invisible in the most important aspect of his humanity. He could bedeck himself in millions of dollars of rhinestones under the blazing lights, but he could never step into the simple light of truth. His court victory wasn't a win for justice, it was a tragic performance, perhaps the greatest and saddest act of his spectacular career. If the Liberace case was a performance of denial for the public, then the final act of Howard Hughes's life was a tragedy performed for an audience of one, in a sealed and sanitized room. After decades as the dashing, daring billionaire, a visionary aviator, a prolific film producer, and a relentless industrialist, Hughes began a retreat from the world so complete it became its own kind of legend. His germ phobia, always a latent part of his personality, metastasized into a debilitating obsessive-compulsive disorder that transformed him from a titan of industry into a prisoner of his own deepest fears. His world shrank from global boardrooms and Hollywood mansions to the sterile confines of a series of penthouse suites, first in Las Vegas and later in hotels across the globe. His existence in these final years was governed by rituals so precise and so strange they defy belief. He would spend weeks, sometimes months, confined to a single germ-free chair, often naked, with tissues box covers placed over his feet to protect them. He became obsessed with the handling of objects, developing an intricate system to avoid contamination. He instructed his aides, a small and intensely loyal group he called the Mormon Mafia, to use exactly 7 or 8 layers of paper towels when handing him anything. They were required to pick up a glass by first putting a fresh paper towel over their hand. then using another set of towels to open a door or a cabinet. Every action was a carefully choreographed ballet designed to create a barrier between him and the invisible enemies he saw everywhere. The stories from this period read like dark parables of absolute power, yielding absolutely no freedom. He once became fixated on a film and watched it on a continuous loop for days on end, his aides taking shifts to ensure the projector never stopped. When he developed a taste for a specific flavor of ice cream, his staff bought up every container of bananas Foster Baskin-Robbins in the state, storing them in a dedicated freezer because he might want one at any moment. Yet for all this control over his immediate environment, he lost control of his own body. He refused medical treatment for his deteriorating condition, his hair and fingernails growing to grotesque lengths, his frame becoming painfully emaciated. The man who had once flown experimental aircraft and dated Katharine Hepburn was now a spectral figure, issuing commands about the handling of canned fruit and the sealing of windows from a soiled bed. Perhaps the most poignant symbol of his isolation was his method of communication. He would often sit for days, writing memoranda on yellow legal pads, issuing detailed and sometimes nonsensical orders to his executives who were forbidden from seeing him. These notes were his last tether to the empire he had built, yet they were composed by a mind increasingly unmoored from reality. He was running massive corporations, making multimillion-dollar decisions, all from a dark room while terrified of a stray dust mote. The immense power he wielded was entirely abstract. It could not get him a clean glass of water without a 15-step decontamination process. Howard Hughes's final years are a stark and terrifying lesson in how even limitless wealth cannot insulate a person from the prisons of the mind. His fortune, estimated in the billions, could buy him entire hotels to live in, but it could not buy him a moment's peace from his own terrifying compulsions. He died in 1976 on an airplane, being transported from Acapulco to a hospital in Houston, a sick and emaciated man who was virtually unrecognizable. His passing ended one of the strangest and most tragic descents in American history, a chilling reminder that the most imposing gated community is the one we can build inside our own heads. Moving from the self-imposed isolation of Howard Hughes, we find a story that proves even the most public and seemingly innocent of figures could not escape the grip of suspicion. In the dark depths of the Great Depression, America found its brightest ray of sunshine in a little girl with 56 perfect blonde ringlets and a dimpled smile. Shirley Temple was more than a child star. She was a national tonic, a symbol of hope and cheerfulness whose box office draw single-handedly saved a major studio from financial ruin. To the public, she was the epitome of pure, uncomplicated childhood. Yet, astonishingly, this beloved icon became the subject of a formal Federal Bureau of Investigation inquiry, prompted by one of the most ludicrous accusations ever leveled against a celebrity. The bizarre saga began with a letter mailed directly to the desk of J. Edgar Hoover. The sender was a frustrated and disgruntled writer who had submitted a script to Temple's studio, 20th Century Fox, only to have it rejected. Seething with resentment and perhaps unhinged creativity, he crafted an elaborate complaint alleging that the studio was involved in a massive, ongoing fraud. His claim was that Shirley Temple was not a child at all. He insisted she was actually a 30-year-old dwarf actress, a sophisticated midget whose true age was being concealed by the studio to maintain her lucrative childish appeal. It was an accusation so patently absurd that in any rational climate, it would have been dismissed as the ranting of a crank and promptly filed in the nearest wastebasket. But this was the era of J. Edgar Hoover's FBI, an institution increasingly preoccupied with hunting hidden enemies and enforcing a rigid, often paranoid concept of American morality. Hoover himself had a well-documented fascination with the private lives of celebrities, maintaining extensive files on anyone he deemed influential or potentially subversive. The letter, despite its outrageous premise, apparently struck a chord. The very idea that the nation's favorite little girl could be an elaborate hoax was too tantalizing a mystery for Hoover's G-men to ignore, or perhaps they felt compelled to investigate any allegation, no matter how foolish, to demonstrate their thoroughness. An official file was opened on Shirley Temple, and agents were assigned to discreetly look into the matter. One can only imagine the scene as seasoned federal agents, more accustomed to tracking gangsters and spies, were tasked with determining the biological age of a 9-year-old girl. The investigation, such as it was, likely involved discreet inquiries with medical professionals and studio personnel, and probably a close scrutiny of public records like her birth certificate. The agents would have quickly and easily confirmed what everyone already knew. Shirley Temple was indeed a genuine child, born in 1928. The case was promptly closed, relegated to a curious footnote in the vast annals of FBI history. The entire episode stands as a monument to sheer bureaucratic absurdity, a moment when the immense power of the federal government was wielded to investigate a fairy tale. This strange incident, however, is more than just a funny story. It reveals the intense and sometimes dark undercurrents that ran beneath the glittering surface of Hollywood's golden age. The accusation itself reflects a deep-seated public anxiety about the artifice of the film industry, a suspicion that the magic on screen was built on a foundation of lies. Furthermore, it highlights the terrifying reach of J. Edgar Hoover's FBI, an organization that believed no aspect of American life, not even the innocence of a child, was beyond its scrutiny. Shirley Temple's file, though closed, serves as a chilling reminder that in the eyes of a powerful and paranoid state, no one is above suspicion, not even the little girl who taught the nation to sing "On the Good Ship Lollipop." If the story of Shirley Temple revealed the absurdity of government suspicion, the tale of Elvis Presley's White House visit shows what happens when a celebrity actively courts that same power, driven by a bizarre and deeply personal mission. By 1970, the king of rock and roll was at a strange crossroads. The hip-shaking rebel who had once been denounced as a moral menace was now an establishment figure, his career in a slight lull but his fame as immense as ever. He was also deeply troubled, witnessing the rising counterculture and the drug use associated with it with a kind of patriotic horror. Elvis saw himself not as a part of this new movement, but as a defender of the traditional American values he held dear. This potent mix of ego, patriotism, and a desire for renewed purpose culminated in one of the most surreal moments in presidential history, a personal meeting with Richard Nixon where Elvis Presley asked to become a federal agent. The entire event was set in motion by a handwritten letter, a remarkable 6-page missive delivered to the White House gates. In it, Elvis expressed his fervent loyalty to the country and his disdain for the drug culture, the hippie elements, the SDS, Black Panthers, etc. that he felt were tearing America apart. He didn't request an autograph or a photo op. He made a direct and serious appeal to the president. He asked to be made a federal agent at large for the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, arguing that his celebrity status would allow him to operate undercover and infiltrate groups that conventional law enforcement could not reach. He believed he could use his fame as a tool, gaining the trust of these elements and then reporting back to the government. It was a plan born of equal parts comic book heroics and a genuine, if wildly naive, desire to serve. To the astonishment of nearly everyone in the West Wing, President Nixon agreed to the meeting. On the morning of December 21, 1970, Elvis arrived at the White House, dressed not in a conservative suit but in a magnificent theatrical outfit of a dark purple velvet suit, a high-collared gold shirt, an enormous gold belt, and matching cape. He accessorized with a cane and a collection of his own police badges from various cities, which he proudly showed to the Secret Service. The visual contrast could not have been more stark. The flamboyant, bejeweled king of American pop culture, walking the solemn marble halls of power to meet the notoriously rigid and formal President Nixon. It was a collision of two entirely different Americas. The meeting itself was brief, lasting only about 30 minutes, but it was packed with a strange and earnest energy. Elvis did most of the talking, passionately reiterating the points from his letter and expressing his concern that the Beatles, whom he saw as a negative influence, had been spreading anti-American sentiment. Nixon, likely bewildered but politically astute enough to see the public relations gold in this encounter, played along. He was particularly fascinated by Elvis's ability to connect with young people, a demographic that had largely rejected his administration. Seeing an opportunity, Nixon agreed to Elvis's request on the spot, ordering his aides to secure an honorary badge from the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs for their new, high-profile volunteer. In return, Elvis offered the president his personal gratitude and, in a moment of pure impulsivity, gave him a hug, a gesture that visibly startled the normally reserved Nixon. The resulting photograph of the two men shaking hands became an instant and enduring icon. It captures the surreal essence of the meeting perfectly, Nixon looking slightly awkward but pleased, Elvis leaning in with an intensity that borders on fervor, his massive ring glinting. For Nixon, it was a priceless public relations coup, an image associating him with one of the most beloved figures in the country. For Elvis, the badge was not a mere trinket. He reportedly cherished it more than any of his Grammy Awards, considering it a symbol of official validation and a sacred duty. He would often show it off to friends, proudly declaring his federal credentials. Yet beneath the bizarre comedy of the situation lies a more poignant and darker truth. Elvis's motivations were far more complex than simple patriotism. This was a man who was himself deeply entangled with prescription medications, living in a gated world of enablers who fed his growing addictions. His crusade against the very drugs that would later contribute to his own demise is a tragic irony of Shakespearean proportions. He was, in many ways, trying to fight his own demons by projecting them onto an entire generation. His request to become a federal agent was likely a cry for help and a search for a purpose that his music no longer provided. He wasn't just playing cop. He was desperately trying to regain a sense of control and authority in a life that was increasingly spinning away from him. The badge was a tangible symbol of the order and respectability he craved, a stark contrast to the chaotic reality of his personal struggles. The meeting was not just a strange historical footnote. It was a profound and sad glimpse into the lonely heart of a king who wanted to be a hero. While Elvis was attempting to join the ranks of federal law enforcement, another entirely different kind of story was taking root in the public imagination, one that required no official documentation to achieve notoriety. In the shadowy realm of Hollywood urban legends, few tales have proven as tenacious as bizarre, or as culturally resonant as the one that inexplicably attached itself to the actor Richard Gere. For decades, a singularly strange and specific rumor has followed him, a story so outlandish it feels like it was ripped from a particularly crude comedy sketch, yet it was repeated with such fervor that it became a part of his public identity. The rumor, of course, was that the star of Pretty Woman and An Officer and a Gentleman had to be rushed to a hospital emergency room to have a live gerbil removed from his rectum. To understand the power of this story, we must first travel back to the late 1980s, a time before the instant fact-checking of the internet, when gossip spread through tabloids, late-night talk show monologues, and schoolyard whispers. The rumor seemed to emerge from the murky depths of the stand-up comedy circuit, with several comedians later accused of being the original source. There was no evidence, no police report, no corroborating testimony from a doctor or nurse, just a vividly absurd image that captured a certain prurient curiosity. It was the perfect storm of a salacious tale. It involved a hugely famous and famously handsome leading man. It played on taboo homoerotic themes in a way that was just coded enough for mass consumption, and it was so graphically memorable that once you heard it, you couldn't unhear it. The impact on Richard Gere was understandably one of immense frustration and anger. For years, he was forced to address a claim that was not just false but humiliating and bizarre. He denied it vehemently and repeatedly, calling it stupid and ridiculous, but in the economy of celebrity gossip, vehement denials often do little more than add fuel to the fire. The story was paradoxically bulletproof precisely because it was so outrageous. Its very absurdity made it seem, to some, like a truth too strange to be invented. It became a relentless undercurrent in his career, a joke that would surface in everything from Howard Stern's radio show to episodes of Family Guy, ensuring that new generations would be introduced to the tale long after its supposed expiration date. So why did this particular rumor, among thousands, achieve such legendary status? Psychologically, it serves as a classic example of a contemporary folktale, functioning much like an ancient myth. It's a cautionary story about the hidden perils of deviant behavior and the unexpected consequences of secret lives. It taps into a deep public fascination with the idea that behind the flawless, polished facade of a movie star, there could exist a reality so strange and unhinged. The rumor wasn't just about a gerbil, it was about the thrilling possibility that the glamorous world of Hollywood was a stage set, and that the real drama was far weirder and more shocking than anything shown on screen. It allowed ordinary people to feel a sense of superiority over a glamorous elite, to chuckle at the notion that a man who had everything could be brought low by something so trivial and ridiculous. Ultimately, the Richard Gere gerbil story is a case study in the life cycle of a modern myth. It demonstrates how a baseless piece of gossip, once released into the cultural wild, can take on a life of its own, completely detached from reality. It thrives not on truth, but on its narrative power, its shock value, its humor, and its ability to symbolize a deeper public anxiety about the private lives of the famous. For Richard Gere, it was an unjust and persistent nuisance. For the rest of us, it remains one of the most enduring artifacts of a pre-digital gossip culture, a reminder that sometimes the strangest celebrity stories aren't about what they did, but about what we collectively decided to believe. From the realm of absurd celebrity rumors, we now turn to one that is decidedly more macabre, a story that has become so entwined with its subject that it is often accepted as fact. The tale of Walt Disney's cryogenic freezing is a cornerstone of modern mythology, a perfect blend of the man's known futuristic ambitions and the public's fascination with the secrets of the powerful. It's a story that suggests the creator of Mickey Mouse, the man who built a kingdom of fantasy, attempted his greatest magic trick of all, cheating death itself to await a future where he could be brought back to life. The legend, in its most common form, is both simple and chilling. It claims that upon his death from lung cancer on December 15, 1966, Walt Disney's body was not prepared for a traditional burial. Instead, it was secretly whisked away to be frozen cryogenically, suspended in a vat of liquid nitrogen beneath the Pirates of the Caribbean ride at Disneyland, waiting for the day when medical science could cure the disease that killed him. It's a narrative straight out of a science fiction novel, and it persists with incredible tenacity, but to understand why it took root, we must look at the man himself. Walt was undeniably a visionary obsessed with the future. He was a driving force behind the development of audio animatronics and was deeply involved in planning Epcot, which he envisioned not as a theme park, but as a real, functioning, experimental prototype community of tomorrow. This well-documented forward-thinking made the idea of him choosing such a futuristic exit seem, to some, almost plausible. The truth, however, is far less sensational and is thoroughly documented. Walt Disney was cremated. His death certificate, signed by his physician, lists his cause of death and confirms the cremation. His ashes were interred just 2 days after his death in a modest plot at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California, where they remain today, visited by family members. The very public memorial service, attended by numerous industry figures, further contradicts any notion of a secret alternative procedure. So, if the facts are so clear, how did this icy legend get its start? The origins appear to lie in a confluence of timing and tabloid journalism. The late 1960s saw a growing public interest in cryonics, spurred by the publication of books like The Prospect of Immortality by Robert Ettinger. The first human was cryogenically frozen with some media attention just a year before Disney's death. This new, bizarre scientific concept was in the cultural ether. Shortly after Disney passed, a freelance writer named Earle and Chappell published a speculative and unsourced piece in a tabloid magazine, suggesting a connection between the two events. The story was too delicious not to spread. It was quickly picked up by other publications, each retelling adding more specific and dramatic details, like the infamous location under the pirate ride, until the fiction hardened into accepted folklore. The enduring power of this myth speaks to something deeper than mere gossip. Walt Disney was a man who built empires from dreams, a modern-day wizard who commanded vast resources. The idea that he could use those resources to attempt to conquer humanity's oldest enemy feels like a logical, if extreme, extension of his character. The myth provides a poetic and mysterious end for a figure who seemed larger than life, transforming a death from cancer into a cliffhanger. It satisfies a public desire for the stories of our greatest creators to have endings as extraordinary as their lives. In a strange way, the false story of Walt Disney on ice has achieved a kind of immortality that the real man never sought, ensuring that the conversation about his life and death continues, frozen not in liquid nitrogen, but in the perpetual cool of popular culture. While the myth of Walt Disney's frozen body appeals to our fascination with technological immortality, our next story involves a very different and very real kind of voyage into the unknown, one that took place not in a laboratory, but within the human mind. If you were to picture the absolute pinnacle of old Hollywood elegance and charm, one name would undoubtedly spring to mind: Cary Grant. For decades, he was the embodiment of effortless sophistication, the quintessential leading man who delivered witty lines with a perfect smile and wore a tailored suit like a second skin. His public persona was one of unflappable poise and control, a man who seemed to have life figured out, which is what makes his most deeply personal revelation so astonishing. Cary Grant was one of Hollywood's most vocal and enthusiastic advocates for the therapeutic use of LSD. This wasn't a clandestine activity or a rebellious phase. It was a course of treatment he undertook with the full support of psychiatrists in the late 1950s and early 60s, long before the drug became synonymous with counterculture chaos. Under careful medical supervision, Grant participated in over 100 sessions, using LSD as a tool to delve into the deepest recesses of his psyche. He described the experience not as a recreational high, but as a profound journey of self-discovery, a necessary process to dismantle the emotional armor he had spent a lifetime constructing. The man known for his impeccable control was actively seeking to lose it, in the most guided and intentional way possible, to find the real person hidden beneath the movie star facade. His motivation was born from a place of deep, private unhappiness. Despite his incredible professional success and global adoration, Grant felt a persistent emptiness and anxiety. He was haunted by a difficult childhood, abandoned by his mother at a young age, and raised by a father who was emotionally distant and occasionally cruel. These early wounds manifested in a series of failed marriages and a lingering sense of being an imposter in his own life. He felt he was playing the part of Cary Grant, the movie star, while the real man, Archie Leach from Bristol, remained lost and wounded. Traditional talk therapy had provided some insights, but he felt he was only scratching the surface. LSD, he believed, offered a way to break through. The results, according to Grant, were nothing short of miraculous. He spoke openly about experiencing a cosmic kind of introspection, where he could revisit painful memories not with trauma, but with a detached, compassionate understanding. He claimed the drug allowed him to finally process the abandonment by his mother, releasing a lifetime of repressed anger and grief. It helped him, as he famously said, to stop acting and start being himself. He described feeling a profound connection to the universe and a sense of unconditional love that had always eluded him. This wasn't about seeing hallucinations, it was about seeing himself, clearly and without judgment, for the very first time. The incredible dissonance between this intense, introspective journey and his public image is what makes his story so compelling. At the very same time he was undergoing these mind-bending therapeutic sessions, he was still appearing in glossy comedies like North by Northwest and Charade, charming audiences with his effortless wit. He managed to compartmentalize these two worlds completely, yet he also became an unlikely evangelist for the substance. In a 1960 interview with Look magazine, he broke the code of Hollywood silence and spoke candidly about his experiences, stating, "All my life, I've been searching for peace of mind. I'd tried yoga, hypnotism, and all sorts of other ways to find it. Then, through LSD, I found it. This was a staggering admission for a major star of his era to make." Cary Grant's embrace of LSD therapy challenges our simplistic notions of the drug's history. It forces us to remember that before it was a symbol of rebellion, it was a serious subject of study in psychiatric circles, investigated for its potential to treat everything from alcoholism to existential anxiety. His story is a poignant reminder that the brightest smiles can often hide the deepest struggles, and that the quest for inner peace can lead even the most polished among us down the most unexpected paths. He didn't see LSD as an escape from reality, but as a key to unlocking a more authentic one. In doing so, the man who perfected the role of the suave, unruffled gentleman revealed a courage far greater than any he ever showed on screen, the courage to finally meet himself. Yet for every fabricated myth like Disney's cryogenic slumber, there are stories of true crime so strange they feel ripped from a poorly written thriller. In the final month of 1963, a year already shattered by the assassination of a president, the world of American entertainment was rocked by a crime that seemed to mirror the dark, paranoid mood of the nation: the kidnapping of Frank Sinatra's 19-year-old son, Frank Sinatra Jr. This was not the carefully planned extraction of a mob prince. It was a chaotic, almost farcical affair executed by a group of shockingly inept amateurs, yet it held a legendary entertainer and his family in a vise of terror for 54 agonizing hours. The incident began on the night of December 8th at the rustic Harrah's Lodge in Lake Tahoe, where the young Sinatra was beginning his own career as a singer. After finishing his set, he was relaxing in his second-floor room when there was a knock at the door. A man claiming to be a delivery driver said he had a package. The moment the door opened, Frank Jr. was confronted by two men holding revolvers. They forced a gag into his mouth, tied his hands with adhesive tape, and swiftly hustled him down a back stairwell and into a waiting car. The entire operation was witnessed by one of Jr.'s friends, who immediately raised the alarm. The news hit Frank Sinatra Sr. with the force of a physical blow. The man known around the world as the chairman of the board, a figure of immense power and connections, was suddenly rendered completely powerless, facing every parent's most primal nightmare. What followed was a series of bizarre and tense negotiations that played out over the telephone. The kidnapper's initial demand was $240,000 in used 2010 $5 and $1 bills, a strangely specific and cumbersome request that required the FBI to scramble to assemble the package. The calls themselves were exercises in surreal incompetence. The ringleader, a 23-year-old petty criminal and amateur pilot named Barry Keenan, did most of the talking. Keenan, who was under the influence of pain medication and alcohol following a recent back injury, often sounded confused and rambling. At one point, he bizarrely identified his group as a cell of right-wing radicals, a claim that added a layer of political paranoia to the ordeal but had no basis in reality. The interactions were so odd that at first, some law enforcement officials wondered if it was an elaborate hoax staged by the son to extort money from his famous father. Frank Sr.'s response was a study in frantic, single-minded determination. He took charge of the negotiations personally, insisting on being the one to speak to the kidnappers, his voice a mixture of fury and desperate pleading. He agreed to all their demands without hesitation, his only concern the safe return of his boy. The designated drop was set for a roadside gas station near Los Angeles. In a scene straight out of one of his own films, Sinatra sent his longtime friend and associate, the actor Brad Dexter, to make the delivery. Dexter, himself a tough and decorated war hero, waited in the dark, a suitcase filled with cash at his feet, until a car slowly approached and a hand emerged to snatch the ransom. True to their word, the kidnappers released Frank Jr., unharmed, on a roadside in Bel Air. He was found by a passing motorist, dazed but physically okay, still wearing the same suit he had been kidnapped in. The aftermath of the crime was almost as strange as the kidnapping itself. The FBI, which had been monitoring the entire operation, tracked down the perpetrators with stunning speed. Their first break came because the kidnappers had been so talkative. They had made over a dozen calls from the same payphone, allowing agents to set up a stakeout. Barry Keenan and his 2 accomplices were arrested within days, and the vast majority of the ransom money was recovered. The trial revealed the stunning lack of sophistication behind the plot. Keenan, it turned out, had conceived the scheme as a way to solve his own financial troubles, believing that Sinatra would be so grateful for his son's return he wouldn't even prosecute. He was, of course, catastrophically wrong. The kidnapping of Frank Sinatra Jr. remains one of the most peculiar chapters in the annals of American crime. It lacked the brutality of the Lindbergh case or the orchestrated menace of a true mob operation. Instead, it was a story of staggering arrogance and amateurish bungling, carried out by individuals who seemed to be acting out a Hollywood fantasy without any understanding of the real-world consequences. For Frank Sinatra Sr., the event left a permanent scar, deepening his inherent distrust of the outside world and reinforcing his famous siege mentality. For the public, it was a jarring glimpse behind the glamorous curtain, revealing that even the most powerful families were vulnerable to the random, chaotic violence of a few foolish individuals with a half-baked plan and a couple of guns. If the frantic, very public ordeal of the Sinatra kidnapping represented one extreme of celebrity life, then our next story presents the absolute opposite, a masterclass in withdrawal so complete it became an art form in itself. In the golden age of Hollywood, no star burned brighter or more mysteriously than Greta Garbo. She was the face of enigmatic beauty, a woman whose soulful eyes and hushed voice conveyed depths of emotion that captivated audiences worldwide. She was a box office titan, the highest-paid actress in the world at her peak, and the embodiment of silver screen glamour, and then, at the age of 36, at the very height of her fame, she simply walked away. She didn't fade away, she vanished, actively cultivating a life of such profound seclusion that her name became synonymous with one phrase, "I want to be alone." This famous line, delivered with a weary sigh in the film Grand Hotel, was sadly misinterpreted by the public. They thought it was a hilarious punchline, a quirky character trait. For Garbo, it was a desperate, heartfelt plea. She didn't mean she wanted to be lonely, she meant she craved solitude, a respite from the crushing gaze of the world. Her retirement in 1941 wasn't a temporary break, it was a permanent severing of ties. She never made another film, never gave a formal interview, and never signed an autograph again. She turned her back on a $1 million career and embarked on a second, far longer act, becoming a ghost in plain sight. Her life in New York City, where she lived for the next 50 years, was a meticulously crafted performance of anonymity. Her stage was the streets of Manhattan, and her role was that of an ordinary, unremarkable woman. She developed a daily routine of long, solitary walks, a habit New Yorkers would eventually become familiar with. But these weren't casual strolls, they were exercises in evasion. She perfected the art of the disguise, not with wigs or costumes, but with a calculated form of invisibility. She would wear oversized sunglasses, pulled low hats, and bulky, unglamorous coats. She would walk quickly with her head down, often holding a handkerchief to her face as if she had a cold, a simple yet effective barrier against eye contact. She became a master of using building awnings to shield herself from view and of darting into shops to avoid being recognized. The few who managed to breach her defenses described a woman of fascinating contradictions. She could be witty and charming in private, a far cry from the dour, tragic figures she often portrayed. She maintained a small, fiercely protected circle of friends with whom she would have lunch or go to galleries, but these outings were conducted with military-level secrecy. She would often enter restaurants through the kitchen to avoid the main dining room. She was famously frugal, haggling over prices in stores despite her immense wealth, and she had a playful, almost girlish side that she revealed only to her closest confidantes. This wasn't a miserable hermit hiding in a dark room. This was a highly intelligent woman who had made a conscious choice to reclaim her identity, on her own terms, by erasing the character of Greta Garbo from her daily life. The mystery she cultivated only grew more potent with each passing decade. As the world changed around her, she remained a constant, elusive specter from a bygone era. Paparazzi photos of an aging Garbo in her signature sunglasses became incredibly valuable precisely because they were so rare. Each grainy image was analyzed like a holy relic, a tiny glimpse of the unseen goddess. The public's fascination transformed from curiosity into a form of reverence. She was no longer just a retired movie star. She was a legend who had chosen to live among them as a mortal, and her silence made her more famous than any press junket ever could. Why did she do it? The reasons are as complex as the woman herself. Some point to the immense pressure of early fame and the suffocating control of the studio system, which owned her image and dictated her every move. Others suggest a deep-seated insecurity and a fear that her greatness as an actress was a fraud that would be exposed. There was also the heartbreak of her great love, conductor Leopold Stokowski, with whom she had a passionate affair, but who ultimately could not accept her unwillingness to have children or live a public life. Her retreat can be seen as the ultimate act of self-preservation. In a world that wanted to consume her, she chose to disappear, to protect the fragile, authentic self that existed behind the iconic face. Greta Garbo's 5 decades of reclusiveness were not a punishment but a liberation. She exchanged the adoration of millions for the freedom to simply be, proving that the strangest celebrity story of all might be the one about the star who found peace by giving it all up to finally, truly, be alone. But if Greta Garbo's retreat was a quiet, calculated exit, the story of Bob Crane's end is a violent, shocking, and unsolved mystery that plunged one of television's most familiar faces into a shadow world of obsession and violence. To the American public in the 1960s, Bob Crane was the epitome of wholesome, clever charm. As Colonel Robert E. Hogan in the hit sitcom Hogan's Heroes, he played a wisecracking American POW, outwitting his bumbling German captors week after week. The role made him a beloved star, a symbol of jaunty American ingenuity, but behind that cheerful facade was a man consumed by a powerful and secretive double life, a compulsion that would ultimately lead him to a grisly end in a cheap Arizona motel room, a murder that remains officially unsolved to this day. Crane's secret world revolved around an insatiable, almost technological obsession with his own sexuality. As his fame grew, so did his opportunities for extramarital affairs, which became his primary pastime. But he wasn't content to simply live these experiences. He felt a driving need to document them. He was an early adopter of cutting-edge video and audio technology, transforming his home and later his travel accommodations into a private studio. He amassed an enormous collection of home-made pornographic tapes and photographs, meticulously cataloging his encounters with a vast number of women. For Crane, this wasn't just about the affairs themselves. It was about the process of recording, reviewing, and reliving them. It was a hobby that bordered on a clinical addiction, a compulsion that alienated his second wife, Patricia, and bewildered even some of his closest friends. He seemed to derive more pleasure from the technological capture of the moment than from the moment itself. This secret life was enabled and actively encouraged by his closest friend, a video electronics salesman named John Henry Carpenter. The two met when Crane was shopping for the very equipment that would become central to his obsession, and they quickly formed a bizarre partnership. Carpenter, a married man himself, became Crane's permanent wingman, his audio-visual technician, and his constant companion on the road. He was the one holding the camera, setting up the lights, and arranging the tapes. Their friendship was a symbiotic bond built on a shared, voyeuristic pursuit, but it was also a relationship fraught with jealousy and competition. As Crane's star began to fade after the cancellation of Hogan's Heroes, he found himself relegated to the dinner theater circuit, and Carpenter was always there, a shadow documenting the declining star's escapades. This dynamic would ultimately form the core of the police's investigation. On the morning of June 29, 1978, Crane was found brutally murdered in his apartment at the Winfield Place Apartments in Scottsdale, Arizona, where he was performing in the play Beginner's Luck. He had been bludgeoned to death with a heavy, cord-like object, likely the cord from a video camera or tripod, a grimly ironic weapon given his life's obsession. The crime scene was particularly vicious, yet there were no signs of forced entry, suggesting he had known and likely trusted his killer. The investigation immediately zeroed in on John Henry Carpenter. He was the last person seen with Crane, having dined with him the night before. He had no verifiable alibi for the time of the murder. Most damningly, a small speck of blood and what appeared to be brain matter was found on the rental car Carpenter drove back to California after the murder. The circumstantial case against him was powerful, yet the case was built entirely on that circumstantial evidence. There was no murder weapon ever found. No eyewitness placed Carpenter at the scene at the exact time of death. The physical evidence from the car, while suspicious, was minuscule and open to interpretation by defense experts. When the case finally went to trial in 1994, 16 years after the murder, the prosecution's case had weakened with time. Carpenter's defense successfully argued that the police had tunnel vision, focusing solely on him while ignoring other potential suspects, including angry husbands or individuals connected to Crane's complex sexual life. The jury found John Henry Carpenter not guilty. The verdict left the case in a state of permanent limbo, officially open, but with no other viable suspects. The murder of Bob Crane is more than a cold case. It is a haunting Hollywood parable about the dangers of a hidden life. It is the story of a man who was killed by the very passions that defined him, in a room that likely contained the equipment he used to feed his addiction. The prime suspect was the one man who was his partner in that secret world. The lack of a conviction ensures that the mystery endures, a dark puzzle with missing pieces we will likely never find. Bob Crane's legacy is a tragic split screen: the bright, smiling colonel who brought laughter into living rooms, and the tortured man whose private obsessions led him into a darkness from which there was no escape. Yet even as the studio walls closed in around Clara Bow to sanitize her image, a very different kind of containment was happening on the other side of the country, where a scandal of an entirely more domestic and bewildering nature was about to erupt. In the rarefied world of high society and old money, few names carried more weight than Astor. Brooke Astor was revered as the Queen of New York philanthropy, a dignified grand dame who dedicated her vast fortune to supporting the city's libraries and cultural institutions. Her public life was a portrait of grace, generosity, and aristocratic propriety, which is what made the events that unfolded in her final years so shocking, revealing a gothic tale of family dysfunction, alleged elder abuse, and a bitter legal battle that would see her only son, Anthony Marshall, convicted of essentially stealing from his own mother. The story begins not with a dramatic event, but with a slow, creeping concern. In 2006, Brooks' grandson, Philip Marshall, filed a lawsuit against his own father, Anthony. His allegation was stunning. He claimed that his grandmother, then 104 years old, was being deliberately neglected and isolated in her Park Avenue duplex. He stated that she was forced to live in squalor, sleeping on a filthy dog bed-style couch, eating pureed peas and oatmeal while suffering from untreated medical conditions. Most disturbingly, he alleged that this was all part of a calculated plan by his father and stepmother to drain Brooks millions for their own personal use, all while she was too mentally diminished by advancing Alzheimer's disease to understand what was happening. The resulting trial was a media sensation, a jarring spectacle that dragged the private life of one of America's most esteemed families into the harsh light of a criminal courtroom. The case was built on a mountain of financial records that told a damning story. Anthony Marshall, who held power of attorney over his mother's affairs, was accused of systematically looting her estate. The examples presented were both large and small, painting a picture of breathtaking entitlement. He had given himself a massive, unauthorized raise for managing her money, funneling millions into his own theater production company, which consistently lost money. He orchestrated the sale of a cherished Childa Hassam painting from her collection, pocketing a $2 million commission for himself from the auction house. The pettiness was as revealing as the grand theft. He was accused of using her funds to pay for trivial personal expenses, everything from his wife's luxury clothing to groceries and his own taxes. But the most heart-wrenching testimony came from those who had witnessed Brooks' decline. Housekeepers and nurses described a woman who was often confused, frightened, and living in conditions utterly at odds with her stature. They testified that she was sometimes denied basic care because her son and daughter-in-law considered it too expensive. The defense argued that Anthony was a devoted son simply carrying out his mother's wishes and making sound financial decisions, but the portrait that emerged was of a man who saw his mother's final years not as a time to provide comfort, but as a final opportunity for plunder. In 2009, Anthony Marshall, then 85 years old himself, was found guilty on 14 of 16 counts, including grand larceny and scheming to defraud. His wife, Charlene, was acquitted of most charges but was widely portrayed in the press as the manipulative force behind the scheme. The conviction of an elderly, frail man for stealing from his even more elderly mother was a deeply uncomfortable spectacle, a tragic conclusion to a family drama that felt more like a Shakespearean play than a modern legal case. The judge ultimately sentenced Marshall to 1 to 3 years in prison, though he served only 2 months due to his failing health. The Brooke Astor case is more than a story of simple greed. It is a profound and unsettling exploration of the vulnerabilities that come with extreme age and wealth, and the terrifying ease with which family members can exploit those they are supposed to protect. It revealed how the machinery of power of attorney, designed for protection, can be weaponized for theft. For the public, it shattered the illusion of the graceful, trouble-free golden years of the elite, exposing a reality where even the most venerated among us can become prisoners in their own palatial homes, victims not of strangers, but of their own blood. The case left a permanent stain on the Astor name, transforming a legacy of legendary philanthropy into a cautionary tale about the corrupting power of money and the tragic fragility of family trust. While the sordid details of the Astor family drama played out in a courtroom, a very different kind of private battle was being waged in the hills above Los Angeles, one that would ultimately force an entire nation to confront a terrifying and misunderstood epidemic. In the mid-1980s, Rock Hudson was the living embodiment of old Hollywood masculinity. With his towering height, rugged good looks, and gentle giant persona, he had been America's favorite leading man for decades, the epitome of the strong, dependable, and unmistakably heterosexual romantic hero. But this carefully crafted public image was a meticulously maintained facade, a performance more demanding than any he had given on screen, In reality, Hudson was a closeted gay man, and by 1984 he was secretly dying of AIDS, a disease that was then widely and wrongly labeled a gay plague and shrouded in fear and bigotry. His illness became a desperate secret, a race against time and the paparazzi's lenses, as the virus ravaged his once robust body, causing drastic weight loss and lesions that could no longer be hidden by stage makeup. Hudson and his inner circle embarked on a frantic campaign of denial and deception. They blamed his gaunt appearance on a recent heart surgery and a strict diet. They pulled strings to get him experimental treatments under pseudonyms. The Hollywood machine that had built him now worked overtime to protect his secret, understanding that the truth would not only destroy his career, but shatter the illusion for millions of fans. This was more than a personal tragedy. It was a high-stakes game of perception, where a disease was seen not as a medical condition, but as a scandal waiting to happen. The heartbreaking climax of this charade came on July 15, 1985, on the set of a television show called Doris Day's Best Friends. Hudson had agreed to appear alongside his old friend and frequent co-star to promote their recent films. It was a decision born of obligation, a final attempt to present a semblance of normalcy. But there was nothing normal about his appearance. He looked frail and ghostly, his suit hanging loosely on his diminished frame. During their playful interview, he was visibly disoriented, sweating profusely, and at one point he forgot the name of their movie, Pillow Talk, a film they had made together decades earlier. The moment was deeply unsettling to viewers, a jarring disconnect between the vibrant memory of the star and the clearly ailing man on their screen. This was his last public appearance. Just days later, his publicist released a terse statement from Paris, where Hudson had flown in a last-ditch effort to seek experimental treatment, finally admitting that the actor was in a French hospital being treated for AIDS. The announcement sent a shockwave around the world. Rock Hudson had AIDS. For millions of Americans, the epidemic had been an abstraction, a distant tragedy affecting a marginalized community they did not know. Now it had a face, and it was the most familiar, all-American face imaginable. The public's perception shifted almost overnight. If a beloved movie icon like Rock Hudson could get this disease, then clearly it was not a moral judgment confined to a specific group. It was a virus, and it was everyone's problem. Hudson's illness became a massive teachable moment, forcing newspapers and nightly news broadcasts to explain the science of HIV transmission, dispelling myths that it could be spread through casual contact. His death on October 2, 1985, did not end the conversation, it ignited it. His legacy became a catalyst for profound change. His close friend, actress Elizabeth Taylor, channeled her grief into furious activism, co-founding the American Foundation for AIDS Research, AMFAR, and becoming one of the most powerful and vocal advocates for funding and compassion. The massive surge in public awareness and sympathy directly led to increased congressional funding for AIDS research and a greater willingness in Hollywood to address the crisis. Rock Hudson never intended to be a hero or a martyr. He was a deeply private man who spent his life fearing the exposure of his truth. But in his death, the truth he had fought so hard to hide did more to humanize the AIDS crisis and accelerate the fight against it than any other single event. His story is a tragic paradox, a man who lived a lie but died a truth that saved countless lives. And speaking of public performances that redefine a legacy, few could command an audience quite like Zsa Zsa Gabor. While others sought privacy or fought serious legal battles, the Hungarian-born socialite turned every moment, no matter how mundane or embarrassing, into a spectacular piece of theater. Her entire life was a performance of fabulous excess, a whirlwind of diamonds, fur coats, and a parade of husbands, all delivered with a thick, glamorous accent and a dismissive wave of a bejeweled hand. But no single incident better crystallized her unique approach to fame than the day in 1989, when she decided the rules of common traffic enforcement simply did not apply to her, leading to an unforgettable confrontation with the Los Angeles Police Department. It began, as so many great Hollywood stories do, on a sunny day in Beverly Hills. Zaza was behind the wheel of her Rolls-Royce Corniche, a car as opulent and attention-grabbing as its owner. She was pulled over by police officer Paul Kramer. For a routine traffic violation, her license plates had expired. For most people, this is a minor inconvenience, a bit of paperwork and perhaps a ticket. For Zaza Gabor, it was an outrageous affront to her dignity. The officer later reported that she was immediately belligerent, presenting an expired driver's license and a broken placard that was supposed to grant her handicapped parking privileges. When he informed her he would have to impound the majestic vehicle, the situation escalated from a disagreement into pure, unscripted spectacle. What happened next became the stuff of instant legend. According to the officer's testimony, a livid Zaza emerged from her Rolls-Royce, declared, "I'm going to slap you," and then made good on her promise, delivering a stinging blow to his face. It was an act of breathtaking audacity. She didn't just argue. She physically assaulted a uniformed police officer in broad daylight, all over an expired registration. She was promptly arrested, handcuffed, and taken to jail, still undoubtedly looking fabulous. The mugshot that was released to the press said it all. There was Zaza, perfectly coiffed, wearing a glamorous white suit and an expression of supremely offended royalty, as if she were merely pausing for an inconvenient portrait session rather than being processed into the penal system. The image was priceless, and she knew it. Her day in court was less a legal proceeding and more a one-woman show titled Zaza vs. the State of California. She arrived for her arraignment not with a somber face and a lawyer doing all the talking, but as the star of her own drama. She pleaded no contest to the battery charge, but the performance was in the justification. She told the judge that the officer had been rude to her, a justification that perfectly encapsulated her worldview. Her feelings were a valid defense against the law. She was sentenced to 3 days in jail, ordered to pay a traffic fine, and was placed on probation, but even her punishment was stage-managed. She served only a few hours of her sentence in an actual cell before being released due to overcrowding, an outcome so perfectly Hollywood it felt scripted. She emerged from the courthouse to a throng of reporters, offering sound bites and radiating the unshakable confidence of someone who believed the world existed for her entertainment. The genius of Zaza Gabor was her innate understanding that in the economy of celebrity, notoriety is just another form of currency. The slap was not a catastrophe for her brand, it was its ultimate expression. It reinforced every aspect of the persona she had spent decades cultivating. The spoiled, glamorous, and utterly irresistible diva who lived by her own rules. She didn't try to hide from the story or spin it into something sympathetic. She leaned into it, celebrating her own fabulous misbehavior. In a world where celebrities now have teams of publicists to manage every scandal, Zaza's approach was refreshingly direct and utterly authentic to her character. She understood that sometimes the best way to handle a scandal is to wear it like your largest diamond brooch, ensuring everyone gets a good look. The incident was a masterclass in turning a negative into a positive narrative, a reminder that for a certain kind of star, there is no such thing as bad publicity. There is only publicity, and she was always the center of it. Yet if Zaza Gabor's antics represent a calculated performance of celebrity, the unprecedented public grief that followed the death of Rudolph Valentino was a phenomenon of pure, unscripted mass emotion. In the sweltering summer of 1926, the silent film icon known as the Great Lover was struck down by a ruptured ulcer and peritonitis. He was just 31 years old. His passing was sudden, shocking, and it unleashed a wave of collective hysteria the likes of which America had never before witnessed. The death of a movie star was a new kind of event for the modern world, and the reaction to Valentino's would set a terrifying and spectacular precedent for the power of fandom. The scene outside the Frank E. Campbell Funeral Chapel in New York City quickly devolved from a solemn gathering into something resembling a riot. An estimated 100,000 people, the vast majority of them women, descended upon the streets, pushing against police barricades in a desperate attempt to catch one last glimpse of their idol. The crowd was so immense and so frantic that it took 85 police officers on horseback to maintain a semblance of order. Windows of nearby buildings were shattered in the crush, store awnings were torn down, and more than 100 people were treated for injuries sustained in the surging, weeping throng. The air was thick with a palpable sense of panic and despair, a raw, communal grief that seemed to short-circuit all rational behavior. Women, overwhelmed by the heat and their emotions, fainted by the dozen, passed hand over head out of the crowd like limp, emotional casualties of a bizarre war. Inside the chapel, the scene was no less surreal. Valentino's body lay in state in an open silver casket, dressed in the formal evening clothes of his screen persona. Over the course of a single day, an unending river of mourners filed past the bier, a staggering 90,000 people in total. The procession moved so slowly that police had to constantly urge people along, yet many would stop overcome to kiss the glass of the casket, leaving behind smudges of lipstick that had to be wiped away by attendants. Some tried to snip locks of his hair as a morbid souvenir. Others simply collapsed, sobbing, and had to be carried out. The atmosphere was less a funeral and more a pilgrimage to the altar of a fallen god, a testament to the intense, intimate connection his fans felt they had with the man they had only ever known on a flickering silver screen. This public display was fueled by a potent combination of factors. Valentino was more than just an actor. He was a symbol of a new, liberated sexuality that both thrilled and terrified a nation still clinging to Victorian ideals. With his smoldering gaze, slicked back hair, and roles as exotic, passionate shakes and tango dancers, he represented a raw, animalistic magnetism that was utterly foreign to American cinema. For the women who adored him, he was a safe vessel for forbidden desires, a fantasy figure who offered an escape from the rigid propriety of their daily lives. His sudden death felt like a personal theft, the extinguishing of a light that had allowed them to dream of a more passionate existence. The hysterical mourning was, in many ways, a grief not just for the man, but for the death of the fantasy he so powerfully embodied. The media of the day, particularly the sensationalist tabloids, poured gasoline on the fire. They printed exaggerated accounts of suicides by despondent fans, stories that were often fabricated but widely believed. They published photos of the massive crowds and the fainting women, turning a funeral into a national spectacle and validating the extreme emotions on display. This coverage created a feedback loop. The more hysterical the reporting became, the more people felt compelled to join the spectacle, to be a part of this historic moment of collective anguish. It was one of the first times the modern machinery of mass media demonstrated its power to amplify and distort public sentiment on a grand scale. In the weeks that followed, the spectacle did not die down. A second funeral was held on the West Coast, and his body was taken on a cross-country train journey, with crowds gathering at every major stop to pay their respects. The lingering question, debated by sociologists and commentators ever since, is whether this hysteria was entirely genuine or a kind of mass performance. It's likely a combination of both. For many, the grief was undoubtedly real and profound. For others, the event provided a rare, socially acceptable outlet to express extreme emotion in public, to be part of a vast, historic drama. The funeral of Rudolph Valentino was not merely the end of a life. It was the birth of a new cultural force. It revealed the terrifying power of celebrity worship, the potent blend of fantasy, desire, and loss that could bring a city to its knees. It showed the world that the death of a screen idol could resonate with the seismic force of a national tragedy, forever changing the way we say goodbye to our gods. But for every carefully managed star like Greta Garbo, there was another whose spirit the system could not contain, and the consequences were devastatingly brutal. The story of Frances Farmer is not just a tale of a promising career cut short. It is a harrowing descent into a nightmare, a dark fable about what happened to a woman who refused to play by the rules, both on screen and off. In the late 1930s, Farmer was hailed as one of Hollywood's most brilliant new talents, a fierce and intelligent actress from Seattle who brought a raw, uncompromising intensity to her roles. She was a stark contrast to the polished, agreeable starlets of the era, outspoken, fiercely intellectual, and openly skeptical of the superficiality of the studio machine. This rebellious spirit, which made her art so electrifying, also made her a target. Her refusal to smile for cameras when she didn't feel like it, her disdain for the press, and her association with left-wing political groups marked her as difficult and unstable in an industry that demanded docile conformity. The cracks began to show under the immense pressure. After a series of professional disappointments and a tumultuous personal life, Farmer's behavior became increasingly erratic. In 1942, after a particularly volatile incident involving a traffic stop and an altercation with a studio hairdresser, a judge gave her a startling ultimatum: either serve a 180-day jail sentence for violating probation or commit herself to a psychiatric hospital for evaluation. Exhausted, frightened, and likely believing it was the safer option, she chose the hospital. It was a decision that would effectively end her life as she knew it. She was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and transferred to the Western State Hospital in Washington, a notorious institution that would become the setting for a years-long ordeal of unimaginable cruelty. The stories that emerged from her time there are the stuff of pure horror. In her shocking 1972 autobiography, Will There Really Be a Morning?, she described a hellscape of institutional abuse. She recounted being stripped naked and thrown into ice-cold hydrotherapy tanks for hours on end as a form of punishment. She wrote of being locked in solitary confinement in filthy, padded cells for weeks, fed slop that was often crawling with insects, and subjected to beatings and sexual assaults by orderlies. The woman who had been celebrated for her fierce mind and independent will was systematically broken down, treated not as a patient but as a troublesome animal to be tamed through humiliation and pain. The most chilling and persistent allegation, one that has been debated by biographers for decades, is that she was subjected to a transorbital, or ice pick, lobotomy. The procedure, which involved inserting a sharp instrument through the eye socket to sever connections in the brain's prefrontal lobe, was touted as a miracle cure for a range of mental illnesses, but was often used as a crude tool to permanently pacify difficult patients. Whether the lobotomy actually occurred remains part of the tragic mystery, but the legend persists because it serves as the ultimate symbol of the system's attempt to literally erase the person she once was. After nearly 5 years of this institutional nightmare, she was finally released in 1950, a ghost of her former self. The fire in her eyes was gone, replaced by a hollow, placid demeanor. She attempted a comeback, even hosting a local television show in Indianapolis, but the vibrant, rebellious artist was forever extinguished. She was a cautionary tale made flesh, a walking reminder of the brutal price of nonconformity. Her story is a terrifying intersection of multiple failing systems: a Hollywood apparatus that chewed up and spat out sensitive artists, a judicial system that saw mental hospitals as a convenient dumping ground for inconvenient women, and a psychiatric establishment that relied on barbaric practices masquerading as science. Frances Farmer's tragedy is that her greatest asset, her powerful, unyielding authenticity, was the very thing the world around her was determined to destroy. She wasn't just failed by a single person or a single institution. She was failed by an entire world that had no place for a woman like her. While the tragic stories of Frances Farmer and Bob Crane are starkly individual, our next tale weaves together a series of misfortunes so interconnected they sparked a supernatural theory that has haunted Hollywood for decades. This is the story of the so-called Superman curse, a pervasive belief that anyone closely associated with the Man of Steel is doomed to suffer extraordinary hardship, a chilling narrative built upon a foundation of very real and heartbreaking tragedies. It begins not with Christopher Reeve, the actor most synonymous with the role, but a generation earlier with the original television Superman, George Reeves. In the 1950s, George Reeves was a household name, the strapping, square-jawed hero who brought the comic book icon to life in The Adventures of Superman. For millions of children, he was the genuine article, a real-life superhero, but for Reeves himself, the role became an inescapable prison. Typecast and unable to find serious work beyond the cape, he grew deeply frustrated with his career, feeling his dignity as an actor was being stripped away. This internal struggle reached its devastating climax on the early morning of June 16, 1959, when Reeves was found dead in his Beverly Hills home from a single gunshot wound to the head. The official ruling was suicide, a conclusion that seemed to align with his known despair over his career, but the circumstances were and remain deeply suspicious. The bullet was fired from a Luger pistol that was found lying mysteriously between his feet. There were no fingerprints on the gun. There were two other adults in the house that night who told conflicting stories and rumors of a romantic entanglement with the wife of a powerful MGM executive swirled, suggesting a possible cover-up. The mystery of his death was the first and darkest chapter in the curse's legend, the tragic end of the man who first made us believe a man could fly. The curse seemed to lie dormant for a time, until a new generation donned the cape and the pattern repeated itself, this time with even more devastating consequences. Christopher Reeve didn't just play Superman. He embodied him with a warmth, grace, and humor that defined the character for an entire generation. His portrayal in the 1978 film and its sequels made him a global superstar, an icon of hope and strength. For years after, he enjoyed a successful career on stage and screen, seemingly having escaped the shadow that consumed George Reeves. Then, on May 27, 1995, the unthinkable happened. During an equestrian competition, Reeve was thrown from his horse. The fall shattered two vertebrae in his neck and severed his spinal cord, leaving him completely paralyzed from the shoulders down and dependent on a ventilator to breathe. In a cruel instant, the man who personified physical perfection and superhuman strength was rendered a quadriplegic. The world watched in stunned horror, and the whispers of a curse grew into a loud, unsettling conversation. How could such a fate befall the one person who so perfectly represented invincibility? It felt like a twisted, cosmic joke, but the curse, as the legend grew, was not satisfied with claiming only the men in the suit. It seemed to extend its reach to those in their immediate orbit. Christopher Reeve's wife, Dana, who became his unwavering pillar of support and a tireless advocate for spinal cord research, appeared to be a beacon of resilience. After Christopher's death in 2004, she continued their charitable work, a symbol of hope. Then, just 17 months later, Dana was diagnosed with lung cancer. Astonishingly, she was a lifelong non-smoker. She passed away in 2006 at the age of 44, a second devastating blow that felt too cruel, too targeted to be mere coincidence. The narrative of a malignant force hunting the Reeve family felt, to many, tragically complete. The list of sorrows connected to the franchise continued to grow, adding fuel to the paranormal fire. Margot Kidder, who lit up the screen as the feisty and fearless Lois Lane opposite Christopher Reeve, battled severe bipolar disorder throughout her life. In 1996, she suffered a very public breakdown, vanishing for several days before being found disoriented and terrified in a stranger's backyard, an episode that was splashed across tabloids and deeply affected her career. Lee Quigley, the infant who played the baby Kal-El in the opening scenes of the 1978 film, died at age 14 from solvent abuse. Even the later films were not immune. Brandon Routh, who starred in 2006's Superman Returns, saw his chance to be the next big superhero star fizzle when the film underperformed and the planned sequel was cancelled, stalling his career for years. More recently, Henry Cavill's journey as the Man of Steel has been a roller coaster of very public hirings, firings, and recastings, a different kind of professional misfortune that fans have added to the curse's long ledger. So, is there truly a mystical hex on the Superman franchise? Skeptics, of course, offer more rational explanations. They point to the sheer statistical probability that in any large group of people, tragedies will occur. They note that the intense fame and typecasting associated with such an iconic role can lead to psychological distress and self-destructive behavior, as it did for George Reeves. Christopher Reeve's accident was a horrific but random event, a risk inherent to the sport of horseback riding. Dana Reeves' cancer, while heartbreaking, was a disease that strikes non-smokers every day. The struggles of other cast members are, sadly, not uncommon in the high-pressure world of Hollywood. The human mind, however, is a pattern-seeking machine, especially in the face of senseless tragedy. The Superman curse provides a narrative, a reason, for why bad things happen to people who seem blessed. It transforms random, awful luck into a story we can comprehend, even if that story is terrifying. It gives a shape to the chaos, offering a dark form of comfort because a curse, however malevolent, is at least an explainable force. Whether you believe in the curse or not, its power as a modern myth is undeniable. It stands as a somber reminder that behind the symbol of hope on the screen, the people who bring him to life are all too human and vulnerable to the same tragedies as anyone else. While the Superman curse speaks to a pattern of external misfortune, our next story reveals a different kind of force, one driven by an internal, unshakable conviction that has both defined and perplexed the world's view of a global superstar. In the pantheon of modern Hollywood, few names conjure images of sheer, relentless commitment quite like Tom Cruise. He is renowned for performing his own death-defying stunts, for a work ethic that borders on the superhuman, and for an intensity that he brings to every role. Yet this same fervent dedication has been channeled into another aspect of his life with even greater passion, his role as the most famous and forceful advocate for the Church of Scientology. His very public alliance with the controversial organization has become an inextricable part of his legend, a saga of unwavering belief that has provoked admiration, concern, and countless questions about the intersection of faith and fame. The world first got a major, unscripted look into the depth of his conviction in the spring of 2005, during what became one of the most dissected television interviews in history. Appearing on the Today Show to promote War of the Worlds, Cruise was asked by host Matt Lauer about his views on psychiatry and the use of antidepressants, topics on which Scientology holds strong and critical positions. What followed was not a typical, polished celebrity soundbite. It was a raw, impassioned, and somewhat startling sermon. Cruise's demeanor shifted from charming movie star to fervent evangelist, his eyes wide with intensity as he denounced psychiatry as a pseudoscience and called antidepressant use irresponsible. He openly criticized actress Brooke Shields for discussing her own use of medication for postpartum depression, stating she should have turned to vitamins and exercise. The interview was a cultural lightning rod. To some, it revealed a concerning lack of empathy and a troubling disconnect from a widely accepted medical practice. To others, it was a bold man speaking his truth without the filter of a publicist. But for everyone watching, it shattered the carefully maintained wall between the actor and his beliefs, exposing a zeal that was far more powerful than any PR strategy. This was not an isolated incident, but rather the most public manifestation of a loyalty that has guided his life for decades. Since being introduced to the church by his first wife, Mimi Rogers, in the late 1980s, Scientology has provided Cruise with a framework and a community he has consistently credited for his success. He has spoken at length about how its practices, specifically a rigorous program of counseling and study known as auditing, helped him overcome dyslexia and unlock his potential. For him, the church is not a hobby or a social club. It is the foundational technology for human achievement and spiritual freedom. This profound gratitude has translated into immense financial and promotional support. He has donated millions to the church and its affiliated organizations, and he has been instrumental in recruiting other high-profile celebrities, effectively serving as its most charismatic and effective ambassador. The impact of this alliance on his public perception is a complex and double-edged sword. On one hand, his devotion has been a source of strength and stability for him personally, providing a tight-knit community that fiercely protects him from external criticism. Within the world of Scientology, he is not just a member, but a literal icon, held up as the ultimate example of what a person can achieve through its teachings. On the other hand, his association has undoubtedly colored the view of him for a large segment of the general public, as allegations and negative reports about the church's practices have mounted over the years. His unwavering support has led to increased scrutiny and suspicion. The bizarre and controlling aspects of the church's mythology, as detailed by former high-ranking members, have created a dissonance for audiences who see the charismatic, all-American hero on screen and then try to reconcile him with the leader of an organization they view as a secretive cult. Perhaps the most tangible professional consequence emerged during his very public separation from actress Katie Holmes in 2012. The split was executed with a startling swiftness and strategic precision by Holmes, who many observers believe was deliberately extracting herself and their daughter, Shirley, from the influence of the church. The ensuing media frenzy was dominated not by gossip about another Hollywood romance gone wrong, but by intense speculation about the role Scientology played in the breakdown of the marriage. For a period, the narrative around Cruise was no longer about his box office power or his latest daring stunt. It was about his faith and its perceived grip on his personal life. The episode demonstrated that his dedication could, at times, overshadow his artistry, becoming the story itself. Through it all, Tom Cruise has never wavered, never apologized, and never backed down from his position. His commitment remains absolute, a rock-solid constant in a career that has otherwise constantly evolved. This creates a fascinating paradox. He is a man who embodies the ultimate in mainstream entertainment, a global symbol of Hollywood success, yet he is simultaneously the figurehead for a belief system that exists far outside the mainstream. He risks his life to entertain millions, yet he devotes himself to an organization that millions view with deep skepticism. His story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about fame, belief, and personal autonomy. Can we separate the art from the artist when the artist's beliefs are so publicly intertwined with their identity? Is his advocacy a sign of a mind unshakably certain, or one dangerously controlled? The answers depend entirely on who you ask, but the question itself is a testament to the unique and unsettling power of Tom Cruise's strange and unwavering conviction. But not all final acts are met with quiet reverence. For one of the most beloved figures in the history of cinema, the peace of the grave would be shockingly short-lived. His eternal rest interrupted by a scheme so clumsy and ghoulish it feels like a grim parody of his own classic comedies. The world knew Charles Chaplin as the Tramp, the gentle, awkward little man who brought laughter and pathos to millions. His death on Christmas Day, 1977, was met with a global outpouring of grief for the artist who had defined an era of film. He was laid to rest in the serene cemetery of Corsier-sur-Vevey, Switzerland, a final curtain call for a man who had given so much joy. Yet just 2 months later, that serenity was shattered by an act of staggering audacity. In the early morning hours of March 2, 1978, 2 men drove a car right up to the Chaplin family plot. Under the cover of darkness and a thick fog, they pried the simple wooden coffin from the ground, loaded it into their vehicle, and simply drove away, leaving behind a gaping hole in the earth and a bewildering mystery. The news, when it broke, sent a wave of revulsion around the world. the desecration of a grave is a universal taboo, a violation that feels instinctively wrong. But to target the grave of Charlie Chaplin, the man was a global treasure, a symbol of innocence and humor. The act seemed not just criminal, but profoundly sacrilegious, an attack on the very idea of joy itself. The motive, however, was not some twisted ideological statement. It was far more mundane and far more pathetic: extortion. Several weeks after the theft, Una Chaplin, the comedian's devoted widow, received a series of rambling, poorly written ransom notes. The thieves demanded 600,000 Swiss francs for the safe return of her husband's coffin, threatening otherwise to dispose of the body in a manner too horrifying to contemplate. The letters were filled with spelling errors and a tone of clumsy menace, more befitting of a cartoon villain than a sophisticated criminal operation. The authors, it seemed, had watched one too many Chaplin films and believed they were starring in their own caper, utterly failing to grasp the profound human grief they were exploiting. The Swiss police, working in conjunction with Una, devised a careful strategy. They instructed her to play along, to express a willingness to pay but to negotiate the sum downward, all while they traced the calls and set up an elaborate surveillance operation. The break in the case came from a simple tip about a local mechanic who had been bragging about the plot in a pub. This led the authorities to two suspects: Roman Wardus, a 24-year-old Polish mechanic, and Gancho Ganov, a 38-year-old Bulgarian auto body shop worker. Their plan, much like the ransom notes, was astonishingly inept. They had no real escape strategy and had buried the coffin in a nearby cornfield, where it was eventually recovered after their arrest. The entire scheme was less a master criminal plot and more a desperate, stupid gamble by two men drowning in debt, who saw a famous name as a quick solution to their problems. The recovery of the coffin brought a measure of relief, but the profound violation could not be so easily undone. The Chaplin family, determined to ensure such a nightmare could never happen again, took a final drastic step. When Charles Chaplin was reinterred in the Corsier-sur-Vevey cemetery, his coffin was not simply lowered back into the earth. It was sealed within a massive, custom-built vault of reinforced concrete, buried under a slab that was several feet thick. It was a fortress of grief, a permanent and impenetrable barrier designed to protect the beloved comedian from the avarice and stupidity of the world he had spent his life entertaining. The story of Chaplin's stolen coffin is a jarring tale of two extremes. It showcases the darkest depths of human opportunism, where even the most sacred symbols of our collective culture are not safe from those who see everything as a commodity to be exploited. Yet it is also a testament to the enduring power of a legacy. The thieves targeted Chaplin because his name held immense value, but they completely misunderstood the nature of that value. It wasn't in his physical remains, it was in the timeless art he left behind. The concrete vault is a sad but powerful monument to that disconnect. It stands as a physical manifestation of a family's love and a world's respect, a permanent shield ensuring that the man who made the world laugh will finally and forever be left in peace. Of course, the world of celebrity is filled with rivalries, but few have burned with the sheer, unadulterated venom of the lifelong war between Bette Davis and Joan Crawford. This wasn't a simple case of two actresses vying for the same roles. It was a clash of titans, a fundamental collision of ideology, background, and pure, unadulterated spite that played out over decades, both on screen and in the vicious gossip columns of Hollywood's golden age. Their hatred was so profound, so creatively vicious, that it transcended mere professional jealousy and became its own form of high art, a masterclass in the subtle and not so subtle art of the vendetta. The roots of their animosity ran deep, anchored in a fundamental difference of being. Bette Davis was the consummate actress's actress, a product of the New York stage who prized her craft above all else. She was known for her intense preparation, her willingness to appear plain or even ugly for a role, and her formidable, almost intimidating intellect. She saw acting as a sacred profession. Joan Crawford, by contrast, was the ultimate movie star, a self-creation who clawed her way up from a difficult past to become a glamour icon. She was a master of the camera's gaze, of lighting, of the carefully curated public image. To Davis, Crawford represented everything that was shallow and fake about Hollywood. To Crawford, Davis was a talentless, pretentious shrew who lacked the grace and beauty of a true star. Their differing approaches were a recipe for mutual contempt, and the studio system, which constantly pitted them against each other for parts and prestige, eagerly poured gasoline on the smoldering fire. For years, their rivalry was a Cold War fought through backhanded compliments in interviews and the quiet lobbying of studio bosses. But the conflict reached its glorious operatic peak in 1962, when they were finally forced to share the screen in the psychological horror classic, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane? The film's plot was a perfect mirror of their real-life dynamic. Davis played Baby Jane Hudson, a former child star who torments her paralyzed sister, Blanche, played by Crawford, in a decaying Hollywood mansion. The genius of the casting was that it allowed their genuine loathing to fuel their performances, creating a chilling and unforgettable dynamic that feels terrifyingly real. The set became a battlefield, and the two legends deployed their weapons with ruthless precision. Bette Davis, ever the method actor, fully immersed herself in the grotesque persona of Baby Jane, complete with caked-on white makeup and a childlike wardrobe. But she didn't leave her performance in front of the camera. She allegedly took pleasure in being in character between takes, needling Crawford with the same vicious energy she used on screen. The most famous and perhaps apocryphal story involves a scene where Davis's character drags Crawford's across the floor. Davis, knowing Crawford had previously injured her shoulder, insisted on multiple takes, purportedly causing Crawford genuine physical pain. When the crew expressed sympathy for Crawford, Davis reportedly snapped, "If she wants to be a star, she should learn to suffer for her art." Not to be outdone, Joan Crawford fought back with a form of warfare she had mastered: psychological manipulation and image management. In a scene where Davis had to kick her character in the ribs, Crawford secretly strapped a lead weight to her torso under her costume, hoping Davis would hurt her own foot upon impact. When Davis delivered the kick with her usual ferocity, she was indeed left in considerable pain, while Crawford remained unharmed, having won a small, cruel victory. But Crawford's most brilliant act of sabotage was purely professional. During their pivotal close-ups in the film's climactic scenes, Davis would pour her heart out in a devastating monologue. Crawford, just off camera, would deliberately remove her shoes and silently tap dance on the concrete floor, knowing the sensitive microphones would pick up the sound and ruin Davis's audio take, forcing her to start her emotionally exhausting performance all over again. It was a move of pure, calculated genius, designed to break her rival's concentration and undermine her prized craft. The feud didn't end when the camera stopped rolling. It simply moved to the awards circuit. When the film was nominated for multiple Academy Awards, including a Best Actress nomination for Davis, the tension reached a fever pitch. Crawford, who was not nominated, saw an opportunity for the ultimate revenge. She quietly contacted every other Best Actress nominee and offered to accept the award on their behalf should they win, knowing they might not attend. When the winner was announced as Anne Bancroft for The Miracle Worker, who was performing on Broadway and could not be present, Joan Crawford, dressed in a magnificent silver gown, glided triumphantly onto the stage to collect the Oscar. The cameras, as she knew they would, immediately cut to Bette Davis's stunned and furious face in the audience. Crawford held the golden statue aloft, basking in the spotlight that had been meant for her co-star, delivering a performance that was arguably the greatest of her career, a masterstroke of public humiliation that ensured her victory in that year's awards season, if not on the ballot. The Davis-Crawford feud is the stuff of Hollywood legend precisely because it was so multifaceted and so enduring. It was a battle between two different philosophies of stardom, fought with every weapon at their disposal. Their mutual hatred was toxic, petty, and often childish, but it was also undeniably compelling. It gave us one of the greatest films of the psychological horror genre and provided decades of deliciously scandalous stories. Their rivalry reminds us that behind the glittering facade of old Hollywood, the emotions were as raw, human, and vicious as anywhere else. They couldn't stand each other, but in a strange way, they were perfect together, each giving the other a nemesis worthy of their immense talent and colossal egos, forever ensuring that their names would be spoken in the same venomous, enthralled breath. While the feud between Davis and Crawford was a very public and deeply personal war, our next story involves a performer who waged a much stranger, more conceptual battle against the audience's very ability to discern truth from fiction. In the landscape of American comedy, there has never been anyone quite like Andy Kaufman. He wasn't a teller of jokes, he was a creator of situations, a conceptual artist whose medium was confusion and whose canvas was the expectations of his audience. He didn't just perform characters, he fully inhabited them, often refusing to break character in interviews and public appearances, leaving everyone, fans, critics, and even his closest friends, perpetually off balance. This lifelong commitment to blurring the lines between performance and reality reached its bewildering, controversial, and utterly brilliant peak with his venture into the world of professional wrestling, a saga where he declared himself the intergender wrestling champion and devoted years to battling women. It began, as so many of his bits did, with a character. In the late 1970s, Kaufman introduced his intergender wrestling champion persona on Saturday Night Live. He wasn't presenting this as a comedy sketch, he was presenting it as a legitimate athletic challenge. Dressed in his signature tacky wrestling attire, he would come out and offer any woman in the audience $1,000 if they could pin him in the ring. He played the part with a completely straight face, portraying himself as a chauvinistic, arrogant heel, the villain of the piece, who belittled women and proclaimed his physical superiority. The audience's reaction was a cocktail of nervous laughter, genuine outrage, and utter confusion. Was this a joke? Was he serious? The ambiguity was the entire point. Kaufman wasn't just trying to get a laugh. He was conducting a social experiment on live television, probing the audience's tolerance for discomfort and their need for a clearly defined reality. What started as a television bit quickly escalated into a full-blown, years-long performance art piece. Kaufman began taking his act on the road, incorporating it into his stand-up shows and even booking legitimate arenas for dedicated wrestling events. He would be accompanied by his loyal, stooge, professional wrestler and manager Jerry, the King Lawler, who played the outraged good-all boy defending the honor of womanhood. Their collaboration was a masterpiece of staged theater. Kaufman would wrestle women from the audience, often pre-selected plants who were in on the act, and defeat them with a series of comical yet technically sound wrestling moves. He would then celebrate his victory with grotesque arrogance, further enraging the live crowd. The performance was so convincing, the anger so palpable, that many spectators were completely taken in, hurling real insults and sometimes even physical objects at him. The entire narrative reached its volcanic apex on July 28, 1982, when Kaufman faced Lawler himself in a highly publicized match at the Mid-South Coliseum in Memphis. In a now legendary moment, Lawler delivered his patented piledriver to Kaufman, who sold the move by being carried out on a stretcher and later appearing on Late Night with David Letterman with a neck brace, sipping coffee through a straw. The ensuing interview was a spectacle of pure, unscripted-seeming fury. Kaufman, staying relentlessly in character, launched into a profanity-laced tirade against Lawler, culminating in him throwing his coffee in the King's face and storming off set. The moment was so electric, so seemingly real, that it remains one of the most talked-about moments in television history. For years, the public believed the animosity was genuine. It was only much later that both men revealed the entire feud was a meticulously crafted work. wrestling parlance for a prearranged storyline. So why would a brilliant comedian devote years of his life to such an bizarre and physically demanding endeavor? To understand Kaufman, one must abandon the search for a simple punchline. His wrestling career was not a means to a comedic end, it was the art itself. He was exploring the very nature of performance and audience complicity. He wanted to see how far he could push a bit before the audience revolted, and in doing so, he held up a mirror to their own prejudices and expectations. By wrestling women, he was tapping into a deep societal nerve around gender roles and masculinity, forcing people to confront their own uncomfortable feelings about violence, sexism, and competition. The laughter was often nervous, the cheers were often angry, and the lines were always intentionally blurred. The legacy of Andy Kaufman's intergender wrestling is a perfect reflection of the man himself, complex, contradictory, and impossible to pin down. Was it an elaborate, misogynistic stunt, or was it a brilliant piece of satire, using the hyperbolic world of wrestling to expose the very real misogyny in society? The answer is likely both and neither. Kaufman reveled in the ambiguity. He loved that some people thought he was a genius and others thought he was a pathetic creep. He existed in the gray area between those two extremes, challenging everyone to decide for themselves what was real and what was performance. In the end, his greatest creation wasn't a character or a specific bit, it was the enduring mystery of Andy Kaufman himself. He left behind a body of work that continues to fascinate and confound, a reminder that the strangest stories are often the ones where the punchline is never delivered, and the question is always more interesting than the answer. Yet for every star who carefully cultivated an aura of mystery, there was another who pursued fame with a blinding, almost desperate intensity, and few burned as brightly or as briefly as Jane Mansfield. In the glossy, competitive world of 1950s and 60s Hollywood, she engineered a persona that was impossible to ignore, a platinum blonde bombshell with a breathy baby doll voice, an impossibly curvaceous figure, and a voracious appetite for the spotlight. But behind the carefully constructed image of the happy, buxom pin-up girl was a far more complex and tumultuous reality, a life of profound insecurity, professional frustration, and a series of bizarre choices that would culminate in a tragic and myth-shrouded death. Mansfield's entire existence was a relentless publicity campaign. She understood the power of spectacle long before the concept of viral marketing existed. Her life was a never-ending series of stunts designed to keep her name in the papers. She was photographed bathing in a tub filled with champagne. She famously spilled out of a dangerously low-cut dress at a Hollywood dinner, and she drove a car painted in pink leopard print. Perhaps her most famous gimmick was the Pink Palace, her lavish Hollywood home that was painted entirely in her signature shade of pink, from the walls to the swimming pool to the lawn furniture. She even had a heart-shaped bathtub and a pink heart-shaped bed, creating a physical monument to her own over-the-top brand of femininity. These were not the actions of a confident woman secure in her talent. They were the tactics of someone fiercely fighting to stay relevant in an industry that was already moving on to the next new thing. She was constantly competing with Marilyn Monroe, though she lacked the nuanced vulnerability that made Monroe an enduring icon. Mansfield's desperation was often visible, a frantic energy that suggested she knew her time at the top was always on the verge of expiration. This search for meaning and perhaps a new kind of power led her into one of the strangest relationships in Hollywood history. In the mid-1960s, she became intimately involved with Anton LaVey, the flamboyant and media-savvy founder of the Church of Satan in San Francisco. LaVey, a former circus worker and police photographer who shaved his head and wore a dramatic black cape, was a showman in his own right, and he recognized a kindred spirit in Mansfield. He declared her the high priestess of his church, and she was frequently photographed at his side at black mass rituals and other events, leaning into the provocative, darkly glamorous association. The relationship was a perfect, if cynical, symbiosis. LaVey gained immense publicity and a touch of Hollywood legitimacy by having a major star as his figurehead, while Mansfield found a new, shocking avenue for headlines and perhaps a sense of belonging and esoteric power that the shallow world of film had failed to provide. Whether her interest in Satanism was a deeply held belief or simply the ultimate publicity stunt remains a subject of debate, but it perfectly encapsulated her trajectory toward the increasingly bizarre and extreme. The final act of her life began on the night of June 29, 1967. Mansfield, her boyfriend Sam Brody, and 3 of her children, including a young Mariska Hargitay, were traveling late at night from a nightclub appearance in Biloxi, Mississippi, to New Orleans, where she was scheduled for a television interview. Their 1966 Buick Electra was speeding along a dark, foggy stretch of Highway 90 when it suddenly slammed into the back of a tractor-trailer that had slowed behind a mosquito control truck spraying a thick, obscuring cloud of pesticide. The impact was horrifyingly severe. The car was designed with a crucial safety feature, a mandatory reinforced steel bar under the truck's rear to prevent cars from sliding underneath in a collision. However, this very safety feature became an instrument of tragedy. The Buick's low profile allowed the front hood to slide completely under the truck, but the passenger cabin did not. The roof of the car was sheared off cleanly by the solid steel bar in a horrific event known as a partial roof ejection. The initial news reports, relying on the grisly and chaotic scene, stated that Mansfield had been decapitated. This single, shocking detail instantly launched a macabre urban legend that persists to this day, the myth of the curse of the decapitation. The official coroner's report, however, tells a different, though no less tragic, story. Jane Mansfield, Sam Brody, and their driver Ronnie Harrison were all killed instantly from massive head trauma. The coroner was explicit: Mansfield was not decapitated. The confusion likely arose from the nature of her injuries and the fact that her distinctive platinum blonde wig was found on the road some distance from the wreckage. The 3 children in the back seat, including 5-year-old Mariska, survived with minor injuries, protected by the collapsed structure of the front seats. The true, lasting impact of the accident was far more significant than any macabre myth. The grotesque nature of the crash and the high-profile death of a major star became a pivotal case study in automotive safety. It provided horrific, undeniable evidence of the dangers of underriding a large truck. Public outcry led directly to a federal mandate requiring all large commercial trucks to be equipped with underride guards, sturdy metal bars suspended beneath the rear of the trailer to prevent a car from sliding underneath in a collision. These Mansfield bars, as they came to be known informally, have saved countless lives in the decades since, a somber legacy born from terrible tragedy. Jane Mansfield's life and death form a perfect, poignant Greek tragedy of Hollywood. She was a woman who craved attention above all else, and in her shocking, widely publicized death, she received more than she could ever have imagined. Yet that final attention spawned a cruel myth that overshadowed her humanity and cemented her in pop culture as a cautionary tale about the price of fame. Her story is a complex tapestry of ambition, vulnerability, spectacle, and ultimately, a strange, unintended redemption. The woman who lived her life in a brilliant shade of pink left behind a legacy painted in the stark contrasts of tragedy and salvation, her memory preserved not just in her films, but in the invisible safety bars on the backs of trucks, a silent guardian on dark roads born from her final, terrible headline. Even the king of cool had a breaking point, a moment where his famously stoic exterior cracked to reveal a torrent of rage and grief so powerful it nearly pushed him into committing an unthinkable act. Steve McQueen was the ultimate symbol of rugged, detached masculinity, a man who raced cars, rode motorcycles, and escaped from Nazi prison camps on screen with a quiet, effortless confidence. But in the late 1970s, McQueen found himself facing an enemy he couldn't outrun or outmaneuver: a manipulative and increasingly violent organization known as the Synanon cult, which had sunk its claws into one of his closest friends. What followed was a dark and little-known chapter where the action hero, consumed by a desperate need for justice, allegedly plotted to solve the problem with a sniper rifle, taking aim at the man he held responsible. To understand the depth of McQueen's fury, one must first understand the sinister evolution of Synanon. It began in the late 1950s as a radical and highly successful drug rehabilitation program in Santa Monica, California, founded by a charismatic and brilliant man named Charles Dederich. Using a confrontational technique called the game, where participants would brutally tear each other down to break through their psychological defenses, Synanon achieved remarkable results and was initially praised by celebrities and politicians alike. McQueen himself had been a supporter in the early days, even referring friends who were struggling with addiction, but over time, Dederich's ambitions grew, and Synanon morphed from a rehab facility into a full-blown authoritarian cult. It declared itself a religion, demanded total devotion from its members, and amassed a fortune through a series of businesses, all while Dederich's rhetoric became more unhinged and paranoid. The turning point for McQueen was personal. His close friend and former stunt double, Dave Barrett, had become deeply enmeshed in Synanon's web. The cult had a policy of severing ties with the outside world, and McQueen watched in horror as his friend was systematically isolated from his old life, his finances absorbed by the group, and his free will eroded. McQueen tried everything in his power to stage an intervention to deprogram Barrett, but the cult's hold was too strong. His frustration mutated into a white-hot anger directed squarely at Charles Dederich, the man he saw as a predatory Svengali who was destroying lives for profit and power. It was in this volatile emotional state that McQueen, according to accounts from friends and biographers, concocted a shockingly extreme plan. He allegedly acquired a high-powered sniper rifle with a scope. He then began conducting reconnaissance, studying Dederich's movements and the layout of the Synanon compound, searching for a clear line of sight. The image is jarring: America's biggest action star, a man who played heroes, lying in the dirt like an assassin, plotting a real-life murder. This wasn't a movie stunt, it was a potential catastrophe born of helpless rage. McQueen felt the legal system was powerless against the cult's influence and legal maneuvering, and he saw himself as the only one who could deliver the justice he felt Dederich deserved. Thankfully, the plan was never carried out. The reasons remain somewhat unclear, a combination of cooler heads prevailing and perhaps McQueen's own realization that crossing that line would destroy him too. Around the same time, external forces began to intervene. Synanon's violent turn finally caught up with it. The group had begun stockpiling weapons, and its members were implicated in several serious crimes, most notoriously the placing of a rattlesnake in the mailbox of a lawyer who was suing them. Dederich was eventually arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder, and the cult's empire began to crumble under the weight of its own notoriety and legal troubles. McQueen's alleged assassination plot reveals a side of the star that is far more complex than his on-screen persona. It shows a man capable of a ferocious, almost primal loyalty to his friends, a quality that was one of his most defining traits off camera. But it also exposes the dangerous flip side of that same character, a man of action who believed that the most direct solution was often the best one, even if that solution was morally and legally monstrous. He was a man who spent his life confronting villains in fiction, and when faced with a real one who was harming someone he loved, he very nearly tried to use the same methods. This strange and dark story serves as a chilling reminder that even the coolest heads can be overcome by heat, and that the line between hero and vigilante is terrifyingly thin. Yet even the raw desperation of Steve McQueen's vigilante rage cannot fully prepare us for the profound sorrow of a final, public unraveling. If his story is one of furious action, then the last act of Judy Garland's life is a haunting study in the opposite, a devastating, passive collapse under the weight of a lifetime of expectation and exhaustion. By 1969, the legendary star, whose voice had once defined hope and wonder for a nation, was a ghost of her former self, a fragile vessel running on little more than memory and sheer, terrified will. Her final months were a painful, public descent, a heartbreaking coda to a career built on magic, and it culminated in a series of concerts in Copenhagen that were less a performance and more a protracted farewell, a difficult and often uncomfortable viewing for the fans who loved her most. To understand the tragedy of those Copenhagen nights, one must first appreciate the immense pressure that had defined her entire existence. Judy Garland wasn't just a performer, she was a natural resource, a commodity mined for her talent from the age of 2. The studio system, most notably MGM, had systematically controlled her life from childhood, feeding her amphetamines to keep her working long hours and barbiturates to force her to sleep, creating a devastating cycle of chemical dependency before she was even out of her teens. Her entire identity was forged in the crucible of performance, her self-worth inextricably linked to the adoration of an audience. This created a terrifying paradox. The stage was both the source of her deepest anxiety and the only place she felt truly validated. By the late 1960s, the prescriptions meant to manage her nerves and chronic insomnia had taken a catastrophic toll. Her body was failing, her finances were in ruin from multiple divorces and tax troubles, and her spirit was utterly depleted. The Copenhagen engagement, a 5-week run at a nightclub called the Talk of the Town, was not a triumphant tour but a dire financial necessity, a last-ditch effort to earn enough money to perhaps secure some future stability. From the very first night, it was clear something was terribly wrong. The woman who walked onto the stage was a mere echo of the vibrant star audiences remembered. She was painfully thin, her famous eyes wide with a glassy, disconnected fear. She moved with an unsteady gait, often clutching the microphone stand for support. The voice, that incredible instrument which had soared so effortlessly over orchestras for decades, was now a shaky, fragile thing. She would forget lyrics to songs she had sung thousands of times, songs like Over the Rainbow, that were etched into her very soul. In these moments, a look of pure panic would flash across her face, a childlike terror of being exposed as a fraud in front of the very people who worshipped her. The audience, a mix of devoted fans and curious onlookers, responded with a painful mixture of pity, embarrassment, and a desperate desire to help. They would often begin singing along, not as a joyful participation, but as a collective lifeline, trying to gently guide her through the melody she could no longer find on her own. These weren't merely bad concerts, they were real-time portraits of a profound personal and professional crisis. Between songs, her rambling, often incoherent monologues revealed a mind adrift. She would tell long, disjointed stories, make inside jokes that confused the audience, and at times seemed to completely lose her train of thought, staring out into the lights as if searching for an exit that wasn't there. Yet in fleeting, miraculous moments, the old Judy would suddenly break through the fog. She would land a punchline with perfect timing, or a phrase of a song would emerge with a startling clarity and the ghost of her former power, a brief flash of the brilliance that made her a legend. These glimpses made the overall spectacle even more devastating. They were proof that the artist was still in there, trapped behind a wall of fatigue, medication, and sheer despair, fighting to connect for one more moment. The Danish audiences, known for their reserved nature, displayed an extraordinary depth of compassion. Rather than booing or walking out, they mostly responded with a supportive, almost protective silence. They seemed to understand they were witnessing not a has-been, but a great artist in her final, most vulnerable state. They applauded her efforts, however small, and endured the painful silences. This strange, somber dynamic transformed the cabaret into something more akin to a vigil. It was no longer a simple show. It was a communal witnessing of a fall from grace, a shared experience that was as much about loyalty and love as it was about entertainment. Judy Garland would perform her last show in Copenhagen on March 25, 1969. Less than 3 months later, on June 22nd, she was found dead in her London home from an accidental barbiturate overdose. Her final performances stand as one of the most heartbreaking chapters in show business history. They are a stark and unflinching reminder of the brutal human cost of fame, a testament to a system that built up icons only to grind them down. There was no grand finale, no graceful exit. For Judy Garland, the curtain fell on a stage where the magic had long since faded, leaving behind only the raw, aching vulnerability of the woman who had spent her entire life trying to give everyone else a rainbow. What these stories ultimately reveal is that fame does not transform a person into something more or less than human. It simply amplifies the humanity that was already there. The bizarre behavior, the shocking secrets, the desperate acts, these are not the antics of a separate species of celebrity. They are the actions of people under an almost unimaginable degree of pressure, scrutiny, and temptation. The spotlight doesn't create new flaws, it pours 1,000,000 watts of power onto existing ones, turning private struggles into public spectacles. Marlon Brando's impulsive generosity, Howard Hughes's paralyzing phobias, and Judy Garland's heartbreaking final performances all stem from the same human needs for connection, control, and love, warped and magnified by the unique distortions of fame. This relentless pressure often exacerbates or even creates significant mental health challenges, a theme that connects these past tales directly to our modern conversations. In previous decades, these struggles were hidden behind studio-managed images, treated as personal failings or sensationalized as moral scandals. Frances Farmer's institutionalization and the attempts to cure her rebellious spirit, or the forced isolation of Greta Garbo, were framed as individual problems. Today, while the stigma has not vanished, there is a greater collective awareness. We now see celebrities speaking openly about anxiety, depression, and addiction, using their platforms to demystify these issues. The tragedy of a figure like Anthony Bourdain feels like a continuation of this age-old pattern, the immense weight of a beloved public persona conflicting with a private pain, but the conversation around it is now far more likely to focus on systemic support and mental health resources rather than just gossip and mystery. Furthermore, the public's role has evolved from passive spectators to active participants, a change accelerated by the digital age. The hysteria at Rudolph Valentino's funeral was a physical, localized phenomenon, limited by geography. Today, that same collective energy is channeled through social media, creating a global 24/7 echo chamber of adoration, criticism, and speculation. The bizarre rumor about Richard Gere spread through tabloids and late-night monologues at a relative crawl. A similar modern hoax would metastasize across the internet in hours, amplified by algorithms and 1 billion shares. This constant, invasive engagement creates a new kind of pressure, where a celebrity's every move is instantly dissected by a global audience, making the curated retreat of a Garbo virtually impossible. The demand for accessibility and authenticity is higher than ever, yet the punishment for any misstep is swift and severe. Yet for all the changes in technology and tone, our fundamental fascination remains the same. We are still drawn to these stories because they serve as modern-day parables. The tale of Liberace's painful denial holds a lesson about the cost of living a lie. The saga of the Astor fortune warns of the corrupting power of wealth within families. Andy Kaufman's wrestling antics challenge our very perception of reality and performance. We use these narratives to navigate our own moral and social landscapes, to understand the limits of ambition, the nature of happiness, and the price of success. They reassure us of our own normalcy while offering a thrilling escape into the extremes of human experience. In the end, these 25 stories are more than just a collection of strange facts. They are a deeply human archive, a reminder that behind the glamorous facade of fame lies the same complex mix of insecurity, desire, fear, and hope that exists in all of us. The context has changed, the cameras are sharper, the media cycle is faster, the scrutiny is more intense, but the core vulnerabilities remain. These celebrities, for all their wealth and adoration, were navigating the same fundamental human condition as anyone else, just on a tightrope, without a net, and in front of the entire world. Their strangest stories are ultimately our own stories writ large, revealing the universal truth that no amount of fame can ever fully shield a person from the beautiful, complicated, and often bizarre struggle of being human. And so our wild journey through the shadowy backlots and gilded cages of Hollywood comes to a close. From Marlon Brando's impulsive island shopping to the tragic, concrete-sealed rest of Charlie Chaplin, we've seen that the true stories born under the California sun are often far stranger than any fiction dreamed up in a writer's room. These 25 tales are more than just bizarre footnotes in history. They are a testament to the immense and often surreal pressure that comes with life in the spotlight, revealing the profound humanity, the vulnerabilities, the eccentricities, the desperate needs that exists behind even the most polished and iconic facades. Tinseltown sells us dreams, but the reality is a complex tapestry of brilliance and brokenness, of grand generosity and shocking betrayal. We've seen how fame can amplify a person's deepest quirks into legendary eccentricities, transform private struggles into public spectacles, and sometimes, as in the case of Rock Hudson, force an entire society to confront its own prejudices. These stories remind us that celebrities are not characters in a movie. They are people navigating an extraordinary existence, and their strangest moments often hold up a funhouse mirror to our own desires, fears, and fascinations. Thank you for joining us on this incredible exploration. The conversation doesn't have to end here. We want to hear from you. What was the most shocking story we covered? Do you have a favorite strange celebrity tale that we didn't mention? Share your thoughts and your own bizarre facts in the comments below. Let's keep this fascinating discussion going. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the weird side of fame, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss our next journey into the unexplained, the unbelievable, and the utterly captivating. Until next time, remember, behind every red carpet and every flashbulb, there's always another story waiting in the wings, and it's usually even weirder than you could possibly imagine.